Clotheshorse is brought to you with support from the following sustainable brands. Selena Sanders, a social impact brand that specializes in upcycled clothing using only reclaimed, vintage, or thrifted materials from tea towels, linens, blankets, and quilts. Sustainably crafted in Los Angeles, each piece is designed to last in one's closet for generations to come. Maximum style, minimal carbon footprint. Picnic Wear, a slow fashion brand made by hand in New York City from vintage and deadstock textiles. Picnic Wear strives for minimal waste but maximum authenticity. Future vintage over future garbage. Find Picnic Wear on Instagram at Picnic Wear, and that's Wear, W-E-A-R, and at www.picnicwear.com. No Flight Back Vintage, bringing fun new life to old things. Always using recycled and secondhand materials to make dope-ass shit for dope-ass people. See more on Instagram at No Flight Back Vintage. Shift Clothing out of beautiful Astoria, Oregon, with a focus on natural fibers, simple hardworking designs, and putting fat people first. Discover more at shiftwheeler.com. Late to the Party, creating one-of-a-kind statement clothing from vintage, salvaged, and thrifted textiles. They hope to tap into the dreamy memories we all hold. Floral curtains, a childhood dress, the wallpaper in your best friend's rec room, all while creating modern, sustainable garments that you'll love wearing and have for years to come. Late to the Party is passionate about celebrating and preserving textiles, the memories they hold, and the stories they have yet to tell. Check them out on Instagram at Late to the Party People. Vino Vintage, based just outside of LA. We love the hunt of shopping secondhand because you never know what you might find. Catch us at flea markets around Southern California by following us on Instagram at vino.vintage so you don't miss our next event. Shop Journal Vintage, specializing in upcycled, handmade, and vintage fashion for all genders. Owner Laura makes each piece by hand with love in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with an emphasis on upcycled menswear, tie-dye, modern jewelry, cottagecore collars, and everything in between. Shop Journal makes pieces they love and hopes you will too. Getting dressed should always be fun. See more on Instagram at shop_journal. Old Flame Mending helps you keep your clothes intact through clothing repair, visible mending, and tailoring. Through extending the life of textiles, Old Flame Mending makes your pieces not only wearable and functional again, but also unique and beautiful. This mending duo is based in Pittsburgh, but they take mail-in mending orders from anywhere in the U.S. For more information, visit them at oldflamemending.com or follow them on Instagram at oldflamemending. Gabriella Antonis is a visual artist and an ethical trade fashion designer. But Gabriella is also a radical feminist micro-business. She's the one-woman band trying to help you understand why slow fashion is what the earth needs. The one-woman band to help you build your own brand. She can take your fashion line from just a concept and do your sketches, pattern making, grading, sourcing, cutting, and sewing. The second option is for those who aren't trying to start a business and who just want ethical garments. Gabriella Antonis will create custom made-to-measure garments just for you. Her goal is to help one person of any size at a time, including beyond size 40. To inquire about this serendipitous intersectional offering of either concept, DM her on Instagram to book a consultation. Please follow her on Instagram and Twitter at Gabriella Antonis. Dylan Page is an online clothing and lifestyle brand based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Our products are chosen with intention for the conscious community. Everything we carry is animal-friendly, ethically made, sustainably sourced, and cruelty-free. Dylan Page is for those who never stop questioning where something comes from. We know that personal experience dictates what's sustainable for you, and we are here to help guide and support you to make choices that fit your needs. Check us out at dylanpage.com and find us on Instagram at dylanpagelifeandstyle. Salt Hats, purveyors of truly sustainable hats, hand-blocked, sewn, and embellished in Detroit, Michigan. Find us on Instagram at Salt Hats. Karen Kinney Studio. Located in Western Massachusetts, Karen specializes in handcrafted earrings from found, upcycled, and repurposed fabrics, as well as other eco-friendly curios, all with a hint of nostalgia, a dollop of whimsy, a dash of color, and 100% fun. Karen is an artist/designer who believes the materials we use matter. See more on Instagram at Karen Kinney Studio or online at www.ckinney.com. Gentle Vibes Vintage. We are purveyors of polyester and psychedelic relics. We encourage experimentation and play not only in your wardrobe, but in your home too. We have thousands of killer vintage pieces ready for their next adventure. See them all on Instagram at Gentle Vibes Vintage. Thumbprint is Detroit's only fair trade marketplace located in the historic Eastern Market. Our small business specializes in products handmade by empowered women in South Africa, making a living wage, creating things they love like hand-painted candles and ceramics. We also carry a curated assortment of sustainable and natural locally made goods. Thumbprint is a great gift destination for both the special people in your life and for yourself. Browse our online store at thumbprintdetroit.com and find us on Instagram at thumbprintdetroit. Blank Cass, or Blanket Coats by Cass, is focused on restoring, renewing, and reviving the history held within vintage and heirloom textiles. By embodying the love, craft, and energy that is original to each vintage textile as I transfer it into a new garment, I hope we can reteach ourselves to care for and mend what we have and make it last. Blank Cass lives on Instagram at _Cass, and a website will be launched soon at blankcass.com. Located in Whistler, Canada, Velvet Underground is a velvet jungle full of vintage and secondhand clothing, plants, a vegan cafe, and lots of rad products from other small sustainable businesses. Our mission is to create a brand and community dedicated to promoting self-expression, as well as educating and inspiring a more sustainable and conscious lifestyle, both for the people and the planet. Find us on Instagram at shop_Velvet Underground or online at www.shopvelvetunderground.com. St. Evens is a New York City-based vintage shop that is dedicated to bringing you those special pieces you'll reach for again and again. More than just a store, St. Evens is dedicated to sharing the stories and history behind the garments. 10% of all sales are donated to a different charitable organization each month. For the month of May, St. Evens is supporting Labor Behind the Label, an anti-sweatshop campaign working to improve conditions and empower workers in the global garment industry. New vintage is released every Thursday at wearstevens.com with previews of new pieces and more brought to you on Instagram at wear_st.evens. That's Wear St. Evens. Country Feedback is a mom and pop record shop in Tarboro, North Carolina. They specialize in used rock, country, and soul and offer affordable vintage clothing and housewares. Do you have used records you want to sell? Country Feedback wants to buy them. Find us on Instagram at Country Feedback Vintage and Vinyl, or head down east and visit our brick and mortar. All are welcome at this inclusive and family-friendly record shop in the country. Welcome to Clotheshorse, the podcast that has had, the craziest week. First, our well broke. We live out in the country, so our water comes from a well. And so we didn't have water for 4 days. I felt so gross. My skin is so broken out. Anyway, not a major problem now. It's fixed. Then our internet was down for several days, which is a real crisis for both of us. Dustin works remotely. I solely exist on the internet now. Really, really stressful week. Definitely a truly cottagecore moment out here in Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania. So far, everything seems to be fixed. The internet's still a little dodgy, but I'm hoping for the best. I'm your host, Amanda, and I promise I've taken a shower. This is episode 79. And it's another blog crossover episode. Last week, the Clotheshorse.world team shared personal essays about our own experiences with work. I took on the unemployment system. Haley wrote about how she refuses to pay her dues. Karrie broke down the failings of the annual performance review, a cause near and dear to my heart as a manager who's had to write and conduct way too many pointless corporate performance reviews. And Meg talked about the fallacy of your work is family and how that leads to overworking and burnout. I urge all of you to read the essays. You can find them at Clotheshorse.world before you listen to our conversations. I'm going to put them in the show notes so you don't even have to type in Clotheshorse.world. But I think reading the essays will make this episode even more enjoyable. Before we jump into these scintillating conversations, I just want to announce that while the blog, Clotheshorse.world, will be moving into Personal Style Month for June, I'll still be over here on the podcast continuing the conversations about labor and our experiences in the workplace. There's just too much to talk about. Fortunately, I can do that because while Clotheshorse.world is a team of people, including myself, Clotheshorse, the podcast, is literally just me with some audio support from Dustin. So I do all of the research, the correspondence, writing, recording, editing, and so on. So if I want to continue talking about labor, well, I can because I'm in charge around here. Clotheshorse is me. Why am I telling you all of this? Because I want you to continue sending me your work stories. I know, based on conversations I've been having on Instagram, that many of you have experiences to share. So send them my way and I will be sharing them throughout the month. You can send me an email, you can call the Clotheshorse hotline, or you can record a voice memo on your phone or computer and send it via email. That's a great option if your story is a little bit longer than, say, 2 or 3 minutes. You can find my email address and the hotline number in the show notes. And please do not send your story via Instagram DM because you know what? I'm totally going to lose it and your story deserves better than that. All right, well, let's jump into our conversations. First up is Haley and Karrie. It turns out that rejecting the notion of paying your dues is a perfect pairing with a takedown of performance reviews. I know, right? It does make sense. So let's get into it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karrie, executive editor of Clotheshorse.world, and I'm back with Haley, our design systems lead, to talk about the essays that we each wrote and published this week under the theme Work Life. Haley, once again, I have a bunch of questions for you after reading your essay, and I'm excited to chat with you again.
I'm super excited as well to chat with you about your essay and my essay. We come from, like we talked about in the previous podcast, we come from like very different places in our career, but within kind of similar lines. And I really loved reading your article because, as we'll discuss later, what you're talking about in your article, I haven't ever had the opportunity to even have, which causes a whole different set of issues. So, yeah, I'm definitely excited to kind of get digging into these.
Yeah, me too. I mean, as usual, your essay starts off with a really strong point of view that I find unconventional. And without giving anything away, because it's right in your title, your essay is called "I Refuse to Pay My Dues." And this stance obviously rejects a conventional wisdom of most career paths. And this convention is that you have to go through a difficult and poorly paid or unpaid apprenticeship before you can expect to start making money and getting promotions. And I think we both have experienced that this is particularly true of creative careers, and your field in particular, graphic design. And I wonder why you think that is.
Yeah, I think that people feel like creatives enjoy what they do, so they need to be punished for it because they all don't enjoy their jobs. I don't know. I don't know what else it could be. I mean, there's also in a creative career, it's kind of just generally more competitive and it's easier to exploit people in ways because one of the biggest things that every creative who has ever been a creative is do it for the exposure, right? And like you don't ask an accountant or a bus driver, or like you don't ask those people to do a job for free for exposure, because that makes no sense. I mean, I guess you could ask accounting. I don't know much about accounting. Or even like a lawyer. You don't ask a lawyer to do free work for exposure. Like you don't ask any of these other, I guess, like standard professions for the idea of like doing something for free for exposure. And with creative professions, I think another thing is to get a job, to get in the door, you have to have portfolio work, and companies exploit that because student work often isn't good enough to get you into your first role. And so you need to like get that free internship so you can work on paid client stuff. So you have real work, quote unquote, in your portfolio, even though student projects, at least in my experience, my student projects were way more thought out than my projects I actually did at my internships.
It's really interesting because you're right. I mean, creativity it's a more intangible service. Whereas accounting and, being a lawyer, I suppose like you're delivering something that has some clear expectations. So it's like you want to develop this portfolio that proves that you can deliver, and you need opportunities to do that first. But it is still, despite being intangible, it is a real service.
Right.
And a valuable one.
It's valuable, and I think it's also that, like, I remember in school having people be like, oh, but don't you like this? And I'm like, yes, but, like, I expect to get paid for work I should get paid for. Like, just because I like it doesn't mean I, like, just want to give it away for free. And I'm even, like, I haven't experienced it a ton with now that I sew, but sewing is a pretty infamous hobby for people trying to get you to do stuff for them unpaid.
Oh, my God.
And yeah, I just, like... Yeah, I don't know. I talked about this in my creativity and capital essay, and I think it's just a devaluation of creativity, even though creativity runs the world and everybody would be pretty miserable without it. But people just don't think like that.
You mentioned in your essay that while you were in school, you heard plenty of tales from teachers about their experiences paying their dues and the workplace abuse they endured. And to you, these sounded like war stories, and this generation, wears those stories like a badge of honor. Do you have any theories why your teachers and mentors look back on paying their dues as an honorable rite of passage, and why your class, your graduating class, saw it differently?
I think it's a complete generational difference. So my class, we are the last year of the millennials, so we were born in 95 and 96. Most of my peers, I of course had peers that were older, and I guess probably younger, but I'm not as aware of those. But a lot of us had our coming of years during 2008 financial crisis. So I was 12 or 13 during that crisis. And that I feel like is when you really start to form your views on money and jobs, because at least in Colorado at 12 to 13, you were maybe looking at your first job at 14, because legally in Colorado, you can start working at 14, which I found out is just younger than everybody else. When I talk to my peers who grew up in Washington, I guess it's not as likely for a 14-year-old to be working. But I think what happened in the 2008 financial crisis is we watched a lot of our parents who were at jobs that they had been at for years and years, if not decades, and companies that they were loyal to and they felt were loyal to them. We watched those companies lay them off without thoughts about them, without thinking about them as people, how it would impact them or anything like that. And I think it's that there was a time where companies were better at faking caring about their employees. I don't think that my parents' companies cared about them any more than my companies do, but I think we have a generation difference in that delusion. Because everywhere I've ever worked, I just assume they don't give a shit about me. And because of that, I'm not going to give a shit or give them any loyalty either. Because to me, it's a two-way street. And I feel like a lot of older generations are really stuck in the way of be loyal to your employer and they'll treat you well. And it's kind of be loyal to your employer and they'll still treat you like garbage. So there's no benefit to it. But even when you look about like the like abolishment of like pensions, like the idea that your company, if you worked there long enough, would like pay you after you retired is gone. And like that would be like a good way to encourage loyalty to a company. Like all of these long-term benefits are pretty much gone, except for maybe like 401k contributions that take like 3 years to be fully vested, or sabbaticals and stuff like that. So like these long-term benefits are gone. Companies have made it apparent they don't care. Even just when you think about like recruiting, now companies ghost their prospective employers. They treat them like garbage. Or, I mean, employees, like the recruiting process now is also really brutal for a worker, where it might have been a little bit different back in the day. Yeah.
I'm thinking about what it takes to be able to do an unpaid internship or a low paying internship. And, it means that you have some kind of financial support, or at least not a ton of debt that you have to start paying when you graduate. So I kind of wonder if the teachers, of your school who maybe got their start in the late 70s through the early 90s, maybe it was financially possible at that time to do it because tuition, while still expensive, hadn't blown up exponentially the way it has in just the last decade. Yeah. And, I'm also thinking a bit about technology changes, and in graphic design specifically, maybe early on, there was a lot of like pre-production grunt work, that an intern could do. Whereas now, like you'll walk into a job with a lot of know-how and an ability from a technical point of view to create client-ready work. Maybe some of the people who are hiring you don't even have the skills that you have. Yeah. So it's like you can walk in and create stuff that the company can immediately make money off of. And that may not have been true of interns, back when your teachers were starting out.
Yeah, but even so, like that grunt work still made companies money. Like you had to have somebody running, because like I come from a actually traditional print background. My first internship was in print. You had to have somebody like producing and kerning and like doing all of these production things anyway. And I think that graphic design at least like has kind of fallen off of its pedestal that it was on because of the technology you talked about. Like now anybody can buy a subscription to Illustrator and kind of call themselves a graphic designer. And I think that's great. I think we've seen this really big democratizing of graphic design, because before you needed to have all this expensive printing equipment, and you had to have the capabilities to be able to draw in gouache, which is not a forgiving substance for anybody who's used it. I love gouache personally, but
me too.
A lot of people don't. And talking to like some of my friends in college, they would start doing freelance and making money off of it as early as their sophomore year of college. So I think that also maybe allowed them to say like no to unpaid internships, is because they were making money anyway with their own clients. Much to, I'm sure, these agencies dismay, because it's not like my friends were charging enough for their work.
Yeah. But there's a challenge of that hierarchy of having to work through a company in order to get clients. You can, if you have the software and, do your own networking, you can get a start on your own. In your essay, you talked about going to a mentor for advice about getting a raise. And it sounds like that person told you that you weren't ready for it, and that you should consider yourself lucky for having the job and the pay that you already have or had. And you ignored this person, which I found impressive. What gave you the confidence to push forward and make the case for your pay increase?
Well, this mentor, it was kind of like a weird, kind of sticky situation in general, because to my face, they would tell me I was ready. Like or they would very subtly tell me I wasn't ready. But they would tell me that they were advocating for me and supporting me. And I would kind of hear whispers from my other coworkers who were in those meetings that they weren't, because they had a very different view on professionality than I do. They believe that you like show up to an office, you pretend your life is like perfect. You You don't ever complain. You don't ever, oh, God forbid, you ever mention that you go to therapy. Like, just kind of that really old school mentality about the office. And for me, I didn't subscribe to that. And I think like they just like fundamentally disagreed, even though I will say I hit my deadlines more than they did. So,
Right.
And to me, at the end of the day, what comes down to a job is, do you do your work well and detail oriented, and do you hit your deadlines? And if the answer is yes, like you're probably doing pretty well. And for me, on top of it, I was taking on lots of additional responsibilities. I think what made me confident is looking at average industry pay and knowing I was below it. I had also just taken on a ton of extra responsibility. At this point, I was training interns and doing things like that. And that is no longer the definition of a junior graphic designer by the time you are training people.
Sure.
And so I don't know. I think it's that in that conversation, quite frankly, I just lost a lot of respect for that person, because it was very clearly a conversation of like, things sucked more for me, so you should like count yourself lucky. And I'm like, well, you should have stood up for yourself back then, and this isn't my problem that you didn't. And so for me, I was like, I know I deserve this. I knew I earned it. I know I'm a good worker. I work hard. I am innovative. I'm efficient. And a lot of employees forget it costs a good amount of money to replace you. It costs sometimes as much as like 10 grand to replace an employee.
Wow.
And that doesn't even really necessarily count for the loss of productivity while you're trying to fill that gap. So it's expensive to lose an employee. And I think like you can kind of work that to your favor. Like definitely when I just decided to do it anyway and ignore him, I like went to my boss and I was basically like, it'll cost you this much to replace me, and I'm only asking for this much of a raise. Like,
wow.
Your move.
You did your homework.
Yes.
So as you know, my essay is about performance reviews, and I was inspired to write it because I had the opportunity to eavesdrop on a friend's mid-year performance review with her boss, which was happening on Zoom. And I witnessed how horribly this manager handled that conversation. And it made me wonder if performance reviews should be canceled. So I'm curious, and it doesn't sound like it, but did your request for a pay increase happen in the context of a performance review?
No, the bane of my existence at my current workplace is there is no formal performance review.
Wow.
Which leaves it completely on the employee to ask for raises, and you have to hope you get a manager that's really good at advocating for you. I was just like bringing this up in our casual one-on-ones, and I was like, I will say, like, I'm probably not always the most tactful about it, but I was basically like, hey, I need a raise if you want to keep me. Like, and I also... I don't want to say I was like naggy about it, but like I was sort of naggy about it, because it's that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And then also like I think of working at a company and kind of these negotiations the way you would maybe work in a relationship. Like I think about in my teenage years how all of my friends would be mad at their boyfriends, but then tell everybody but their boyfriends why they were mad at them. And like, I think about like my relationship at a company similar, where like, if they don't know I'm frustrated, how can I expect them to fix it? So I've always been kind of one to like air my frustrations with my pay or my title or what have you. Because I'm kind of like, well, if I don't communicate to them, they can't even make a step to fix it. And like going and getting a job is a lot of work, like a new one. So, but yeah, no, I like read your essay. And I get the feeling about like pointless performance reviews, but I'm at a company that there is a real lack in equity because there is no space to bring these up. So it's primarily men getting raises. It's primarily like people who are willing to like go and just like point blank bring it up. And like, that's like a pretty hard thing to do. And I think the benefit of a performance review is it gives an employee who's maybe a little less outspoken a space to ask for these things.
You are right. And I think it is a lot harder to advocate for yourself out of the blue. I mean, kudos to you for kind of keeping tabs on your own performance, doing your homework about what the market value is for what you're doing, and also knowing more about the employment landscape and how much it costs for companies to find new hires. And also the loss of productivity and training. Those are all really solid points that I think people don't always think about. One of my most distinctive memories as a manager was the first time an employee came to me and asked for a raise. And she did it at her mid-year performance review. And I honestly wasn't prepared. I absolutely love this person and we're still close friends. And I thought she deserved the raise, but I suggested that we use the rest of the year to build her case for it. And she didn't let me off the hook and told me that if I thought she deserved the promotion, I should start advocating for it mid-year when the budget is still open, which she's absolutely right. I mean, at the end of the year, budgets are already closed. Promotions are decided. It's the wrong time to start asking. You have to advocate for yourself earlier in the year. So it was embarrassing because she knew the game better than I did. And I think the crux of the matter was that I kind of jumped over the editorial apprenticeship and I wasn't really in touch with how long it can take to get through all of these micro promotions before you're finally an editor. I think it's similar in graphic design, but in editorial, you start out as an editorial assistant and then an assistant editor and then an associate editor. Like there are just like so many little micro promotions and little raises before you're an editor. So if you're really managing your career, you try to get through those quickly. You don't wait around.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, it's not like upper management was telling us, me, middle managers, how to promote our employees. And I think the truth is that in publishing, you sort of need these tiers of support, and there just isn't enough room in the company structure and budget for everyone to keep growing. So it is really up to entry level staff to push for promotions and raises and, possibly leave the company if they aren't making progress.
Right. And I mean, I think like the savviest entry level people are who get promoted the quickest. I would say I definitely, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have definitely been promoted earlier than I ended up being because of the pandemic. They froze all promotions. It was a really frustrating experience, actually, because I had started advocating for a raise and promotion for myself, and I believe it was September of 2019, to try to get in on, we did every 3 months at my work, so I was trying to get into the January cycle, because I had been hired on January of the previous year, so I was like, 1 year, get a raise, get a promotion. It's pretty normal in early entry level careers to do that. You shouldn't be waiting these long stretches of time to get promotions. And then basically what happened is they announced that they were raising all the senior designers to various director and manager titles, and I wasn't getting any sort of raise and promotion. I was told by my boss that like I would be in the next round. He put in my, I guess, like application for promotion, whatever, the paperwork for it, on the beginning of March. And by mid-March, we had the pandemic and we froze all promotions and raises. So I was penalized by having a boss that did not know how to work the system because obviously like my promotion was much less than everybody else's. And so it would have been easier to get that in before, I don't know. And just some of those senior level people had also had promotions within the last year. And that's like a really fast promotion. And so I just found it incredibly frustrating. And I think it's honestly quite nonsense. And my company, not to like harp too bad on them, but my company has been making killer profits throughout the whole pandemic, like most companies. And so there was no justification for freezing raises and promotions other than for them to make more money.
That's so frustrating, especially because you're right. Your raise compared to leveling up a bunch of more senior people like wouldn't have cost as much, but it means a lot to you. And so that's really frustrating.
And during that time in my career, I had to learn to separate my value from my career. I had put a lot of value, like self-worth into my career. And I spiraled pretty bad when promotions got froze. I felt pretty worthless. I felt pretty shitty. And so like the past year, I've been really working on making sure my career does not add to my value as a person, like personally, I guess. And I think that has been really beneficial because I don't know how much more relaxed at work. I put a lot less pressure on myself. But yeah, it was really brutal. And like going back to kind of the performance review thing, when I had asked my boss for a performance review, he asked me how he should structure it. And I was kind of like, well, that's your job. Like, I'm 22 years old, or I guess I was 23. But like, I'm like, you like, at the very least, if you don't know how to structure it, like Google it when I leave. Like there are plenty of online resources to tell you how to give an employee a performance review. And so then I like structured my own performance review. For my performance review, he like booked a room. It like felt kind of vaguely official, but I knew it was totally not official. And I like went into this room and he was basically like, so tell me about how you think you're performing. And I'm like, well, if you're going to leave that up to me, I'm going to tell you a whole lot of pros and maybe one con. Nice. And so that's what I went in and did. Yeah, I don't know. It was like such a waste of my time. And he like also asked, he's like, do you want me to bring in like the senior designers to like critique your work? And I'm like, that's not what a performance review is.
No, no, that's different.
That's very different. I don't know. It was like the most flabbergasting. And it was in that moment that I realized that most managers have no idea what they're doing, because they're not given enough training onto like how to do their job. And like in my company's case, we're still in this weird, scrappy startup mindset, even though we're a corporation of like 1,500 people. And so they just like don't have these structures in, and they're they're experiencing a lot of growing pains because of it. And they're experiencing their top talent turning over.
Yeah. You know, you're making a good case for performance reviews. Whereas I think in my essay, given, you know, that I was watching the specific experience of a friend, it made me reflect on how harmful they can be. But when you describe the context that you're working in, and particularly dealing with a boss who doesn't even know how to do it, I can start to appreciate the HR structure and formality of it. I've always worked in a place where there were performance reviews, so I don't know what it's like not to have them. And ideally, it's a transparent process where managers and employees can get on the same page and potentially map out the next step of an employee's career. But often, I think the reality is that the performance review process is just only as good as the people conducting it. And you're right, managers generally aren't trained to handle those conversations well, and neither are the employees. And so when I talk about performance reviews being canceled, what I'm really objecting to is the performance of an HR procedural where everyone just wants to get the documentation done and move on. And I really wish the emphasis was on actually communicating with each other.
As I've discussed, like I've had to kind of basically performance review myself during one-on-ones with bosses. And it's just not ideal. And I agree that kind of nobody's trained to do it well. Like I'm almost like more people could go through to design school, because if there's one thing I can do, it's take critique.
Yeah.
And I could also give critique. Like part of design school, honestly, is like putting your work on a board next to everybody else, feeling super shitty about your work, and then having people critique your work. And depending on the design school, mine, I was lucky, like babied us, I guess, but a lot of design schools, they'll critique your work until you cry while you're up there. And they just like, which is like, I think is too far, but they really teach you to like remove yourself from your work. And that's like part of that process is like you slowly learn to become like more hardened and bitter. I don't know. But I think like not enough people experience critique. Because like for me, when I have gotten feedback that like maybe I'm too harsh, or like I don't take it personally.
Yeah.
Because I have been through design school and like my work isn't personal work. It's not a personal attack on my work. If somebody doesn't like it, I can disagree with them. But at the end of the day, if they're the stakeholder, it's their call. And like, it doesn't reflect on anything I'm doing personally. And I don't know. I really feel like they're just like, it should be like a requirement in high school, or maybe not high school because everyone's self-esteem is a mess, but like in college or something, or when you enter the workforce, like that you need to like go through critique school.
I think you're right.
Of how to do constructive feedback. Cause like there's the whole, I think they call it a compliment sandwich, where you start with a compliment and then you like kind of say all your negative things and then you end with a compliment. And like, I don't know, like I feel like I'm pretty good at even like navigating because of my experience being critiqued in class. Like I remember in college crying and crying and crying some days after critique because I had just had my work ripped apart. But I feel pretty hard at this point. Like at this point, I'm kind of like, well, like, you just, like, don't like my personality, and that's fine. That's not a reflection on me, necessarily. And it's not necessarily a poor reflection on them. Like, it's fine. Not everything works. And I feel like, as a result, I've also learned how to give feedback to people, like, negative feedback to people in a way that is very palatable. And so, I don't know. We just don't learn how to communicate ever.
I think you're right. I think there are a lot of ways in which we can go through school without, you get grades, but that's not the same thing as getting feedback the way you described. And it really is critical in managing people. And it's something that I lacked training in when I first started managing people, delegating, giving feedback, receiving feedback, giving credit, all of that was kind of terrifying. And, when people become managers, they're promoted into that role because they're good at what they do. But it doesn't mean that they know how to mentor others or manage a process. Those are totally separate skills. And, fortunately, I worked for a large company that provided management training, and I really ate that up with a spoon. I just really enjoyed that. But, you're wise to approach your manager with a bit of detachment emotionally, and also some empathy, because, he's supposed to look like he knows what he's doing, but he's just a person. He has knowledge gaps and insecurities like everyone else. And your best bet is just to position yourself as someone who can help the organization and by extension, make him look good. And, I'm still annoyed by the fact that the burden was on you to define the review process, but it definitely gave you some power in that situation.
Yeah, no, it definitely did, because my review basically became like, look at my accomplishments. Nice. Here's one thing I think I could maybe work on, but I think I'm also doing okay on it.
Debatable.
Yeah. It was very funny because, he was basically like, what do you think you lack? And I'm like, experience?
Right.
Like, I'm only 2 years into my career, and I just think when I'm in a room with senior designers, they ask better questions than I do, and that's just like a time thing.
Yeah, that's nothing personal.
Especially because so many performance reviews start around employee self-reflection. I think there can be a disservice in being honest about it. I think if you are supposed to self-reflect, you are supposed to self-reflect on how to sell yourself the way you would for an interview. Most companies don't actually want you to be honest.
No.
At all.
I think you're right.
Which is frustrating.
I mean, when I did self-reviews, I'm someone who gravitates towards self-reflection, and I would put a lot of thought into the performance review, and then I would kind of like go back and rewrite it so that it wasn't a soul-bearing exercise. I didn't trust my manager or the organization in general enough to expose the ways that I felt inadequate or unsupported on the job. And I just wasn't going to offer up as much self-criticism as I felt, which I think is wise. And, most of the time my managers would agree with my assessments and they would write some additional nice things. But I don't honestly remember walking out with a deeper insight into my performance. And in some ways, I think I could have used some constructive feedback, especially further into my career. And, I'm realizing now that I have a problem with the employee review process starting with a self-evaluation, because you are asking the person who has less power in the overall dynamic to make themselves vulnerable with a self-critique. And I think the burden should be on the manager to articulate the bigger picture goals and point out where they see the employee's strengths and challenges within that specific context. It's not personal strengths and weaknesses. It's about the job and the goals and how the person is doing vis-a-vis those. So I kind of just feel like it's lazy to ask the employee to shape the conversation.
I 100% agree, because like, again, like going back to the critique in the classroom, I didn't go up there and critique my work first. Like everybody else had their pass at it. And then I got to say, like, I agree with you or I disagree with you. I got to decide where I wanted to fight you and where I wanted to like align myself with you. Like I totally agree. And I just think like, I think managers lack training, and I think companies don't really understand what managers should be doing, and managers should be growing their people. And that is not, and ultimately what a lot of managerial roles become is not them growing their people, but them getting credit for work they didn't really have a part of, and like things like that. It's incredibly frustrating.
Why would you do that? Your work is there.
I don't know. Yeah. You don't start a graphic design critique by critiquing your own work. Companies don't value vulnerability, and then they're asking you to be vulnerable. Because that's like one thing I really struggle with about corporations is the fact that vulnerability is a weakness, when I would say like my vulnerability is my number one strength. It's how you connect with people. It's how you move through the world, is by opening yourself up and learning things. And companies like completely like ick that. In your essay, you talk a lot about, or not a lot, but you kind of mention about how employers make hiring mistakes and then take this like slow, painful, terrible process to figure out how to fix them, either by like scrutinizing the employee and then eventually firing them, or scrutinizing them, keeping them, and scrutinizing them for the rest of their lives at that company. I've seen that happen to many a friend where they got put on a PIP. And then they survived their PIP period, but like they just feel like they're walking on eggshells the rest of their time at that company. I think this happens a lot, and we talked already kind of about communication and the real lack of communication in the corporate world. I think ultimately most of the time where a person fails at their job, it is at the fault of the company. A lot of job postings don't actually explain the challenges of the roles because they're trying to sell themselves to you as you apply. And as a result, they hire the wrong employee, and in a way are catfishing this job, because this job isn't what you think it is when you actually step into the role. Since you have had the opportunity to be a manager, have you ever seen something like this play out or ended up on either side of job catfishing?
I love this phrase, job catfishing. Catfishing in general is just so fascinating to me. But yeah, no, you mentioned the performance improvement plan, the PIP, which is the process by which someone isn't working out in their job, and then they're given a 3-month plan to improve. They're given some goals to meet, which are generally impossible and hard to survive. And it's sort of just a whole mechanism of getting an employee a rationale for firing them. And, when someone survives that process, I don't think they ever feel valid within their job.
No. And that process isn't for them. It's for the liability of a company, so they can't get sued.
Totally. So, to get back to your question, my own career moves have involved taking newly created roles where there was going to be a lot of unknowns. And I think that was clear out of the gate. So I don't feel like I have personally witnessed or experienced, well, no, I should say I haven't personally experienced this, but I definitely witnessed it with this friend who I wrote about in my essay. She definitely experienced the catfishing that you just described. Her actual job title ended up being different from the one that she applied for. And the company pulled this very clever sleight of hand to change the title in the hiring process. And I think the company probably thought that these changes weren't terribly significant, but in fact, my friend wouldn't have even applied for the job title that she currently holds. So I think companies create jobs for the organization that they hope to be, not what they currently are. And that kind of aspirational hiring makes sense on some level, but if it isn't handled with transparency, then employees can feel totally misled. Have you witnessed a catfishing experience?
I think I've been the catfish when I think about it. So when I was hired on at my current job, I think I catfished them. Like, now that I've like reflected on the idea of like corporate catfishing, they described I came on as a contractor to do digital production design work. So this would be like email production, display ad production, like super boring work. They were basically like, please do all this work from home and don't come into the office. And what I did is I came into the office 3 days a week. I socialized with everybody. I had lunch because I knew that was my way in. I was like, if I want to convert this contract and become a full-time employee, I have to make everybody like me and want to have me around. And like doing that from home does not benefit me. So I think, told them that I was going to work from home and then didn't. So I think I catfished them. And even thinking about so I have been doing a role that is not my role for probably the past 2-ish years at this job, 2.5 maybe. But it's kind of like on me. Like I've decided that I don't want to do the job they hired me for. And so I've pushed myself to grow in this other role. And so like talking about like the promotion, the only benefit that happened with that delay in my promotion is I was able to get promoted to the title that I wanted to. So I was just going to get promoted from a junior graphic designer to a senior not a senior. That would be a big jump, to a normal graphic designer. And basically what happened in that extra, 9 months I waited for that promotion is me and actually the same mentor who gave me the bad advice, he did make up for it 100%. He worked with me to kind of make this made up title. Like, so I'm now a visual experience designer. This isn't kind of a real thing.
That's cool. Sounds good.
Like it's not an industry standard term, but basically it is what we came up with together that described my role, because about half my role is visual campaign work and about half of it is UX work. So we just kind of made this like hybrid weird title. And so it like worked out in my favor. Like I said, he may have screwed up in that moment, but he really, really made up for it. And I'm very thankful for it.
I'm glad that he came through, and I think what you did was smart. I mean, yes, I guess it could be called catfishing. It could also be called getting your foot in the door, and I don't think anyone's ever frowned upon that. So
yeah,
it's funny though.
Yeah, but I do laugh because like even talking to my coworkers now who I've been working with for almost 3 years, they're like, yeah, when we hired you, the expectation was that you were going to be basically like this email display ad monkey and you were just going to do all this production design and get stuff out the door. And then you came in and you didn't do that. And they're super thankful to have me. Like, so it's like not a bad thing or a poor reflection. But I would say it maybe isn't catfishing, but like if you thought about a company doing that to a person, it would feel like catfishing. So like gray area, it worked out well for me. I would highly recommend, I don't know, if you're on a contract position that you want to be converted, like really getting in as much face time as you can with the people who could hire you. Like I even remember the day before I got my like job conversion offer, it was the weirdest day because I got invited to this company event that like technically contractors weren't invited to. And then all my employees, like my fellow employees, ended up saying like all this weird mushy things about me. And I'm like, I don't know what's happening. Why is everyone being so mushy? And then the next day I got the job offer and I was like, that's wild. I was like, now I know why everybody was so weird, is everybody knew except for me.
That's nice. That's good. I mean, look, it's up to them to say to you, hey, it's great you're so ambitious, but we only need this. And, so therefore you should take this energy elsewhere.
And I took advantage of having a boss who doesn't know how to manage people. So he would have no idea how to tell me not to do these things.
Well, I guess they probably needed it too.
So...
So yeah, I really feel like this whole performance review issue is an issue of communication. And, that managers need to take responsibility for articulating goals to the best of their ability. And no one holds all the cards. As you've pointed out, employees have cards to hold as well. And no one knows all the answers, and goals can change and hiring mistakes happen. But I just wish that everyone was trained to make performance conversations less personal and more contextual. I think we can be more honest and at the same time feel less vulnerable when we know that we're not being judged personally, but rather how we sync up to the requirements of the job.
Critique school.
Yeah, exactly.
We need critique school so desperately for everybody.
So I applaud you for seeking the promotion and higher pay. And if you don't get it, I can tell already that you see it for what it is, that it's about the context and the limitations of your current company and not a reflection on who you are and what your potential is.
Yeah. And I would like to also just real quick acknowledge, I work in the tech industry, so this was a fully different game. I have more cards than some employees do, and I have a lot of privilege because of that. Because in the tech industry, it's competitive to hire. And so it puts, I do want to throw that out there because I know from when I worked retail that I held no cards.
Yeah.
And I mean, you do hold the cards of that lost productivity, but retailers, people who manage retail, they don't really necessarily have that foresight to see that. And so I do want to throw that out there that I do think there's a lot of privilege and kind of the brazenness and rashness that I have because I do work in an industry where they have to earn their employees a little bit more than other industries. Don't get me wrong. The second they can take my job overseas, it's gone. And I know that. Yeah. But while that's not the case, I'm going to milk the heck out of it.
Yeah. And, the worst that can happen to anyone is that you're told no. And, that the promotion is just not going to happen. And that's useful information to have and good to initiate that conversation either way.
Yeah, it's really important to know where you stand, to know where you should be taking your future.
Indeed. Well, Haley, I think your future is going to be just fine. I'm very confident in you. And thank you for sharing all of this with me.
Yes, thank you. This was good fun.
As always.
Wow, that was so great. Thank you so much, Haley and Karrie, for taking the time to record your conversation and, letting all of us hear it. I did want to say that I most definitely have been catfished by an employer, basically lured into the interview process with one job, then the official job offer was for a different title or role. I bet some of you who are listening to this right now have had the same experience. In fact, this happened to me with my last job, the one I had before the pandemic. At that point, I took it because I wanted the money and the health insurance, but it did feel like a bummer to move back several years in my career from a title perspective. I ended up in a really weird situation where I had as much experience, if not more, than my boss, but she had a more traditional retail experience, whereas I came from startup culture. And, I also am a non-traditional sort of person. So it was very weird. I'm sure that is one of the reasons I was laid off in the pandemic. I did want to say that I think the vast majority of performance reviews that are happening out there are actually so unhelpful. And that doesn't mean that they have to be or that they can't be great. Because if you have a great manager who is a true mentor, if your employer gives managers the tools and support to provide true helpful feedback and create development plans, well, then a performance review can be an incredible tool. For me, mentoring and developing talent is one of my favorite things about my job. Well, I guess I don't have my job right now is different, right? It's making this podcast and I work alone. But back when I had a whole team, training and helping people grow their skills and their career was just my favorite thing. And so I would find a way to make the performance review structure work for me. But for most of my jobs, the raise was already determined before I wrote the performance review for the person on my team. Someone who was controlling the budget would tell me the raise I was allowed to give, and I was expected to generate a review that supported that number. So I often would find myself having to score lower than I wanted and then create feedback that aligned with that lower score because, spoiler, the raise I was allowed to give was never, and I mean that all caps, never higher than I had planned it. It was always lower, which meant even if I felt that an employee was killing it, which in most cases they were, and deserved to be rewarded for all of their hard work, I still had to write this slightly negative performance review to justify on paper this lower raise. I'm getting angry just talking about it. What happens is that the opportunity to give true feedback and mentorship is lost. I mean, once again, I would salvage it. I would come to the table with all of these development plans and like a calendar, and I would do everything I could to ensure that the employee did not feel defeated by this performance review, by, let's give ourselves some marching orders. Like, let's make a plan for how you're totally going to get a raise the next time. Of course, I was in that moment writing a check that, as my uncle used to like to say, writing a check that my ass could not cash, because I was not going to get to determine whether they got that next raise either. And not to be depressing, but their hard work wasn't going to determine that either. And so in many corporate settings, the performance review process is just a way of controlling the flow of wage increases to ensure that they stay on budget, that they happen all at once at a specific time for cash flow purposes, and that everyone gets to feel the illusion that raises were determined fairly, which they most definitely were not. I had another boss who felt that scoring too high would give workers an inflated sense of self-esteem, and so she would make me rewrite my reviews until they were negative enough to make the people feel at least somewhat defeated. Her idea being, if you tell someone that they are doing a great job, they won't be motivated to continue doing a good job, which is so cynical and I hope not true. Do you think that's true? I hope it's not true. I just want to add one more thing. Back during the 2008 recession, I was in the same place in my career where Haley is now, and my company instated a freeze on raises and promotions that lasted almost 2 years. It was devastating for many of us lower level workers who were in that early or even early mid level of our careers. And it definitely set back my career. I would probably be a VP or a president somewhere right now, but I was held back in title at a really integral moment in my life. And in buying, it's all about the title. There's a progression, there's a timeline, and if you are falling behind, it's kind of impossible to catch up. Same thing goes for salary increases, right? Ironically, in the midst of that, my employer also made a record high level of profit during that wage freeze. Coincidence? Well, thinking about that is a great transition into my conversation with Meg, because we are going to talk about how employers have continued to prioritize profits over people, even during a global pandemic. So let's get into it. Well, Meg, you're a regular around here, but why don't you remind everyone of who you are?
Totally. Thanks, Amanda. I'm Meg. I'm the content producer over at Clotheshorse.world and longtime Clotheshorse community member and fan. And yeah, I'm here to chat with Amanda for the tail end of Labor Month. So let's get it on.
We were paired up because we both have been on unemployment in Pennsylvania. So
True.
What a distinction.
Totally. We've also both experienced burnout as well, if we want to go the other way around. So we've got lots to discuss.
For sure, for sure. Meg, I was actually rereading your essay today and getting like so excited to talk about it. But first, we're going to talk about mine. We're going to talk about unemployment, and then we're going to transition into Meg's.
So, Amanda, obviously, I enjoyed reading your essay for so many reasons, but one of which, because I could relate. So. Let's remind everyone, for those who have read but may not remember, or those who have not read your essay yet, the number of flaming hurdles that people have to jump through just to qualify for unemployment in Pennsylvania. And granted, this was adjusted once the pandemic hit, because these were like relatively unforeseen and unique circumstances. But let's talk about just how difficult it is to qualify for unemployment, given the state that you live in.
Yeah. And I will say, based on my work helping other people and working with Unemployed Action, the problems we experienced in Pennsylvania are they're not a unique situation. Actually, in Florida, the system was so decrepit and so unprepared for what happened that people were waiting in line to fill out paper applications. So at least here in Pennsylvania, you could apply via the internet. The results varied, but so here in Pennsylvania, you lose your job, you have to go on to the website and fill out a claim. And for the most part, it's not super challenging, but the website is really decrepit and will kick you out a couple times if it's a particularly busy day. There are limited hours each day when you can actually do that. Like, you couldn't wake up at midnight, or I guess some people are still awake then. I live a farmer life now. But you couldn't at midnight say, I'm going to apply for unemployment, because the site's down overnight. It's also down on Saturdays. And none of that is very clear when you visit the site, right? The application itself, I think, could be confusing, and is confusing for many people because it uses a lot of jargon, verbiage, if you will, that is only someone who actually works for the Department of Labor and Industry would truly know. I am a very wordy person. I love a good vocabulary word. I read constantly, and I found myself having to look up a lot of the things they were asking me because it was a little confusing. Once you take care of that, you think, okay, I have successfully completed my claim. I'm sure the money's going to come soon.
Right.
And some people that I was furloughed with at the same time did get their unemployment benefits within a few weeks. I waited 3 months for no particular reason. There wasn't a problem with my application. It was just the person it was assigned to had too much work, or I don't know, got sick. Who knows? I'll never know. But it took months to be processed. And so I was just kind of in this holding pattern, feeling like, wow, this is probably going to get approved after I go back to work. Of course, I didn't go back to work. And so that put a lot more pressure on me getting my benefits. I don't know if everybody remembers, but the CARES Act was the first bill that was signed into law early in the pandemic. And it provided many, many different programs, right? One of them was all of these extended and enhanced unemployment benefits. It expired on the 26th of December, otherwise known as the day after Christmas.
Yep.
And for at least a month, there had been a lot of work to, draft a new law. I think it's the HEROES Act. Does that sound right to you?
That does sound right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's been so many. And so, unfortunately, Trump didn't sign it into law until after the CARES Act had expired. And so all of the computer systems lost their mind. A term that comes to mind is they shit the bed. And that is because these computer systems have been intentionally not updated to the internet era, if you will. Most of them use a language called COBOL. And if you don't know what that is, don't feel ashamed, because it's like a computer language from the 60s. And most people who go to school for computer science, for coding, for programming now don't learn that. It's considered an antiquated language. So most people who know COBOL are retired. Isn't that crazy?
That is, and I think that just speaks to how little some states have invested in unemployment as a service to denizens of the state, which is kind of frustrating because, this is a safety net that we're paying into with each paycheck we get from an employer or with taxes that we pay. So, if you actually do need this service, which a lot of people do, and especially, over the past year, and it just becomes even that much more difficult to get it. It becomes your full-time job just to acquire the unemployment that you so clearly deserve. I certainly was feeling a little bit disenchanted with the whole process, as I'm sure a lot of people were.
Yeah. And so it's like difficult because this system has been intentionally neglected in all of the states, which I think is really interesting because it's not as if 2008 was that long ago. And that was a really deep recession where a lot of people lost jobs. I know I held on to my job, but it certainly shifted the trajectory of my career. How about you, Meg? Do you feel like
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I actually graduated into that recession. So it was extra fun trying to get my career started. And that's part of the reason I even retreated into grad school, as I sort of vaguely referred to in our last chat when we talked about creativity and capitalism, because the job market was just that tough given the recession. So I was struggling myself just to, get my professional aspirations going. It was hard all around.
Right. And I will say that, yes, the internet has become faster and more elaborate since 2008, but it still was leaps and bounds beyond where the unemployment system is right now, technologically. And so in the midst of the recession, at least here in Pennsylvania, the legislature approved additional funding to upgrade the system. Because guess what? It was also a nightmare then. But what the Department of Labor and Industry decided to do was not do that and hold on to the money, which seems illegal, but I'm not in charge around here. And so they did do some minor changes, but the contractors that they hired to do that, the vendors, I guess is what they call them, were not great. In fact, the vendor that they did choose to create the PUA system, PUA as they call it, which is the special unemployment for gig workers, basically freelancers, et cetera, people who don't get a W-2. That system was created by an outside vendor who has a terrible track record, is generally considered inadvisable to hire for things like this. And yet they did it because it was a hot deal. I'm on traditional unemployment, so I didn't have to deal with the PUA system, but apparently it was a nightmare also for everybody who tried to sign up. And it is so poorly created that those people can't even get direct deposit for their payments. It has to be sent to a card.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This pay to play debit card. Yeah. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, you literally pay to use it. It's so scammy.
There are service fees.
Yeah. Here in Pennsylvania, the system was really, really bad. And then we have this tsunami of unemployment. And when the bill expired in December, the computer system here in Pennsylvania was like, all right, I just give up. And what happened is a lot of people, not everybody, you had to be in a specific sort of bucket. You had to be someone who had used all of their weeks of traditional unemployment and were going to shift to PEUC, which was the federal extension that was created as part of the HEROES Act. If you had already exhausted your traditional benefits and had shifted to PEUC before the 26th of December, you were going to be fine. Your payments were going to continue. If, as I did and many, many other people did, that week was the week you were supposed to shift over to PEUC, which was a massive number of people because a lot of people got laid off at the same exact time, including myself, which would be the last week of March. Then you were in this weird holding pattern while they tried to fix your claim. And I did not get a payment until mid to late March. It was terrible. I was very stressed out. I couldn't sleep. I am lucky because Dustin has a job, so we were not homeless or starving. But I would go into Facebook groups where I helped people, and people were in a bad situation. People had their cars repossessed. They couldn't afford diapers or medication or health care. They were losing their internet, so their kids couldn't do school anymore. People didn't even have gas to drive to the food bank, which, by the way, the Department of Labor and Industry was telling us, listen, if you haven't gotten your unemployment, thank you for your patience, you should go to a food bank. Like, that's literally what they were telling us. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's no like consideration or reconciliation or retribution for having to wait for this money that you need to survive, right? It's just, okay, you have to wait, which is really disappointing.
Yeah. And there was this general attitude outside of the people who were really suffering that everybody was just lazy, that they were entitled, that they didn't want to work, and that people, this is a myth that drives me crazy, people were somehow getting rich off of unemployment.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Let's just dispel this myth that people are getting so rich or are, benefiting so much from unemployment that, they would never want to work again. It's not even free money, as we established earlier. This is something that you contribute to with taxes, with your paycheck. And even if that weren't true, the amount of compensation you get for unemployment in any state in this country, it would never be enough to retire on or save with.
No!
And it's of course it's temporary, so it's not going to last forever. So who are these people that are getting wealthy on unemployment?
Oh my God, I know. I mean, I want to say that I get the maximum here in Pennsylvania. The other thing that a lot of people might not know is that because unemployment is a state program, states determine their benefits. So there's a pretty wide spectrum. Like, there are states where the average is about $200. And then there are places like Boston where it gets closer to $400 or $500. Pennsylvania is kind of in the middle. So I get the maximum here, which is less than 20% of my income before I lost my job, and is about, before taxes, $24,000 a year. It's not I can barely afford my health insurance, It's not a lot of money, even with the extra $1,200 a month that we have been getting, but we weren't getting for a while, on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
It's enough to get by as long as you don't have a mortgage, a car payment, children, health issues that require a lot more health care. I mean, I could go on and on. It's not enough to live in the city. We had to move out to the country. And I cannot say this enough. People want to work. Yeah, of course there are lazy people. There are lazy people at all jobs and all income levels, right? There are lazy people with jobs. Most people want to work because you don't make enough money off of unemployment to actually make a living. And you don't get benefits. And
so true.
It's super inconsistent. So one thing that I think of the pandemic, one of the side effects of the pandemic, as it has turned trolling into a pastime for so many people. There would be people who would come into the unemployment groups on Facebook where all we were literally doing is helping people fill out their claims, manage what was going on, help them, decode all the mail that they would get or questions and stuff like that. There are people who would show up in the group to be like, you're all fucking lazy, go get a job. There would also be people who would show up who would say, hey, I've had to work at a grocery store this whole pandemic. I don't want to hear you losers talking about how you don't get your unemployment. Like, I have to work and you're probably making more money than me. And I would say, listen, sir, maybe I'm making as much money on unemployment at home as you are at the grocery store, but you also have a future, right? You have health insurance, you have other benefits, and that you have a paycheck coming every week. And that when the pandemic is over, that you have a job. The rest of us don't know that. We don't have any certainty. Who would want to live that way?
I don't think anybody. And furthermore, having a job affords you some control over your career, your life, your finances. I mean, when you're on unemployment, you are depending on the government, albeit a state government, for your income, which can be a very scary situation for a lot of people. And, there's also this idea that, hopefully people who are are gainfully employed right now are able to enjoy their work in some capacity. But, having a way to spend your time that is productive for you, that feels valuable, that is fulfilling. And, it's really just surprising to me how much people want to criticize individuals who have found themselves on unemployment as if they intentionally gained the system to end up there.
I know.
I don't understand that. And it sounds like there's a lot of pent up anger and aggression from those people that are like jumping into these, Facebook groups that you're, spending time in helping people and just expressing all of this anger. Like, are you jealous? Do you want to be on unemployment? Like, maybe, it's a grass is always greener situation, because I really don't understand that.
Yeah, well, and I also think that the media, like the right-wing media and like the GOP, have built up this myth that people are intentionally not working to get these benefits, that people are trying to get fired to get these benefits. I want to say this for a lot of people who might not know. If you get fired from your job because you like broke company policy or you were late all the time, you're getting written up, you don't get unemployment. You don't get unemployment if you quit your job. Mm-hmm. You only qualify for unemployment benefits if you were laid off or you could not meet the company's like sort of expectations for your work. It's not like it's easy to get unemployment in the first place.
Oh, it's so hard.
And something else that I think is really important to call out for people. Let's say you got COVID while you were on unemployment. You can't get any benefits while you're sick because you're not ready and able to work. If you have a baby while you're on unemployment, you can't get unemployment benefits while you're having the baby and recovering. If you have surgery, same thing. It's not like you get paid time off to go have a baby or get surgery. It's a very vulnerable situation.
Absolutely. And I think this also speaks to the issue that for people that are fortunate enough to be employed, they're still not being compensated properly for their time, whether it's in their paycheck or their benefits or the way they're treated at work. You mentioned someone who was a grocery store worker who, moonlighted in the chat room that you were in about unemployment. And like grocery people who work in grocery stores, we really discovered who the essential workers of this pandemic are. And I don't know for a fact if they're afforded the proper respect and, compensation for what they do. I don't know if they're treated the way they need to be treated because they are truly essential. And I think they're probably feeling some of that frustration. And maybe, I don't know for sure, but maybe those people are taking it out on those unemployment chat rooms because they've nowhere else to express themselves. They don't want to necessarily lose their job, but they're not getting treated the way they need to be treated.
I mean, honestly, the unemployment system is just another symptom of how little regard there is for the working class, which I know that sounds like a really intense statement, but what we should really be doing is all of us banding together to make change. Because I agree, the system is broken. You shouldn't be making so little to work at a grocery store in general, especially during a pandemic. And people shouldn't, seriously, somehow getting an extra $300 a week is making people make more on unemployment than at their jobs. How fucked up is that?
It's super fucked up.
That is ridiculous. That is the problem that people should be angry about, not that the benefits exist in the first place.
Absolutely. All right, Amanda, let's talk about the bigger picture here for a second. Let's talk about all these major companies that are laying people off, that are, letting people go so that they end up on unemployment. And honestly, I find it very upsetting, and you've alluded to this in your article. A lot of these companies, it's likely that their motivation is just to be able to report record profitability. Human resources are some of the most expensive costs of doing any business. And it seems like in this pandemic, one of the major go-tos for a lot of big business has been to just let the people go so that they can hold on to their money. It's such a heartless move, in my opinion. And the government is picking up the tab, which kind of blows my mind, how much they're willing to, accommodate these corporations so they can cut expenses. Can you speak to that a little bit more? I mean, I know you've had direct experience with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was laid off for that exact reason, not because I had a bad job performance, not because the company was going to go under. In fact, the company that employed me is a huge retail conglomerate that has multiple brands, that has hundreds of $1 million just in the bank, uh, definitely could afford to keep paying my paycheck. It wasn't like a small business that like a restaurant that was going to go under because they had to close their doors. They still had a really strong online business that was keeping the company rolling. They opened stores the moment they could, and really didn't do a lot to protect their store workers either. But that's a whole other story. So I was laid off, the last week of July of last year. Now, that might not mean much to a lot of people who don't work in the biz. But for those of you who do, you hear the last week of July and you say, that's the end of a fiscal quarter. That's interesting timing. And I would say, ding, 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 you are correct. Because I get laid off, I get a very tiny severance, not commiserate with the level of work I'd done, the amount of work I'd done, or the position I had. My insurance was cut off. I got an extra 5 days of health insurance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it sucked, right? It was just because things are really bad here. Like, we're just not doing very well and we have to make cutbacks. And I was very sympathetic because I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, it's better for me to lose my job than like 5 people to lose their job. Fine. Although, real talk of everyone on my team, I was the one who's the kind of the most life career was ended by being laid off because, I am at a level where there aren't a lot of jobs. And unlike everybody else I worked with, I don't come from generational wealth. My parents were going to be able to help me out. I couldn't move in with my parents, that kind of thing. Anyway, I accepted it with a really high level of toxic positivity, just trying to be so nice. And a week later, I'm laying in bed. I wake up. I have a million text messages and Instagram messages that are screenshots of a plethora of articles that my employer is being written about in how they had just filed shared their Q2 results. And they had made a quote. This was the adjective, surprise $34 million profit, which was amazing because it was in the midst of a pandemic. And I'm here to tell all of you, there are 2 ways that money was made. 1, by not paying garment workers and canceling tons of orders. And 2, by not paying its workers here in the United States, by either furloughing them or laying them off. That money was directly taken out of their workers' pockets.
Profit over people. Ugh.
Profit over people. It's disgusting. And my company is not the only place that did that. Let me tell you, that was really common. We heard a lot about people who worked in the service industry losing their jobs, right? That is a more organic relationship, I guess I would say, because restaurants were closed, right? Most restaurants are small businesses. It makes sense. But when we talk about a huge corporation like that has the financial security to keep their workers around and doesn't choose to do that, we're really talking about a major ethical issue.
Absolutely. And I'm sure a lot of those companies that laid people off probably still got, pandemic loans. And it makes you wonder what they're doing with that money, all these government bailouts, so to speak, that were related to the coronavirus outbreak. I don't have any, facts to substantiate that, but I'm just curious, it would be interesting to look into companies that were benefiting from that and, what their behavior was like in terms of their human resources. I feel like I saw some probably clickbait articles here and there about companies spending loan money from the government during that time in interesting ways.
It is interesting because I feel like we would see news articles about the airlines were going to have to furlough people and restaurants, but the reality is that for a lot of these retail companies and other large corporations, we didn't see any of that kind of coverage. And I know so many people who lost their job in the pandemic who worked, for example, in fashion and retail. So I feel like these companies kind of kept it hush hush for obvious reasons. Because if you heard that, I mean, Meg, where I worked. But let's just say you did. But I said, this is what happened to me. This is where I worked. Would you actually want to shop there anymore?
No. I wouldn't want to shop there anyway, but.
But yeah, you would be like, what the fuck? Like, that is so messed up. And I think when you say it out loud like that, it is so dark. And that is the reality for so many people who lost their jobs. So, I did not know much about the unemployment system before this all happened. Obviously, I've had a crash course in it. And I found out that unemployment as a program was created after the Great Depression as part of the New Deal. And it was because, analysts were realizing that most of the time, like a vast majority of the time, when workers lost their job, it wasn't because of something they'd done wrong. It wasn't performance related. It was because companies were doing layoffs to preserve profitability. And that is why unemployment insurance, unemployment compensation was created in the first place. Because often these numbers would be pretty devastating. Often, especially back in that era, if you worked in a town where there was only one industry around, like if you got laid off, you're in a bad situation, right?
Yeah.
I feel like we have lost sight of that this problem of companies laying people off to preserve profit is as old as time practically. And yet we still haven't redefined how we, like, I don't know, just like, why is that okay?
I think it makes it easier for the powers that be, honestly, because it's less, work for them or less money out of the government's pocket, so to speak. I mean, that's all, a hypothesis. But I mean, before 2020, the unemployment system was pretty low key, and it was really hard to get on it anyway. So there weren't a lot of people benefiting from it as they deserved to. But yeah, it's definitely wild. And, from a human resources perspective, if there's a performance issue with a job, I feel like more often than not, of course, there are always extenuating circumstances. It would be more cost effective to keep that employee and work with them to improve their performance than to fire them and hire someone completely new, train them, get them used to everything, regardless of what the industry is. I mean, all jobs require some sort of training or onboarding. I mean, to say otherwise is just ignorant. So, I mean, it just seems so obvious that all of this, unemployment layoff is a result of companies just trying to think about their bottom line.
I mean, I think it's really interesting, actually, that you bring that up, like the cost of onboarding people and training them and whatnot, because like I don't know, about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer ago, I found out that while my role had been technically eliminated, that was why I was being laid off, someone else was moved into my role. And that person was at least 10 years younger than me and had about 10% of the experience I'd had in buying. And I know that because I trained and onboarded that person.
Oh my gosh. So you did the work for them. It was internal. So it was an easy shift. And they probably underpaid them.
Also, I was interesting. I was like, the day I found that out, thank you, LinkedIn. Thank you. I was really upset, and I texted Kim, who you all know from the department, about it. And I was like, I'm really upset. And she was like, do you want to talk on the phone? It was so early in the morning in LA when we had this conversation. And she was like, I just can't believe this. Like, because the thing is, like, buying is an experienced thing. The role that I had before was actually a step back in title from what I'd had before that. But I was just like, I want money. I want health insurance. I'll take it. And that title itself is the kind of title that you need at least 10 years of experience to get to, because there is so much high level strategy involved. You need experience for it. And Kim was just like mortified. She was like, I don't understand why they would pull someone in who has such little experience to do that job, because now that the pandemic is over, they need someone with experience to help them rebuild their business. And I was like, yeah, I don't get it either. But like, they're not thinking things through that way. They're thinking about the bottom line, which is not, and I don't want to like denigrate the person who is now the senior buyer at my old job, because, she's amazing. She's so funny and a delightful person, and she's smart, but she doesn't have that experience.
Right. It's not about that person per se, but it's about the strategy of the company and the way they're behaving. Right. And what that signals, and you're right. Like, you can't I mean, you can study fashion, of course, and you can study business, but you can't get a degree in buying retail. As you said, that comes from on the job experience. So it's not easily replaced. And I mean, perhaps they're just, I don't know what they're thinking, but perhaps they're thinking that, okay, let's export all of this stress and work onto this person. And if they rise to the occasion and succeed, great, we got a hot deal out of that. And if they fail, then they'll just go to the next person. I mean, maybe they're just, outsourcing all of that, which is really unfortunate.
I mean, I think that's interesting because it does speak to like the way so many employers view their employees, which is that they're pretty disposable and they're very plug and play. Like, oh, those batteries went dead. Throw them out. Put some new ones in there. Next.
Yeah.
There isn't that level of loyalty that we, the employees, are expected to give, right?
Absolutely.
And that is a great transition into your article. We didn't even plan this.
Oh my gosh.
It's so good.
No, you're so right. It's very low risk for a big company to test somebody out, but it's very high risk for that individual. I mean, this could be their career at stake. So how are they supposed to be able to say no?
Right. Well, and especially right now, like you don't have a lot of other options. So I think something that I have been thinking about so much for the past few months, especially during Labor Month, is there are so many ways in which we, the employees, are manipulated into giving it our all, way more than we actually have, right? It's interesting because the level of loyalty and sacrifice that we are expected to give our employer is like literally not reciprocated at all. And one of those ways that companies manipulate us is that idea of work as family. It seems sketchy to me. I'm just going to say this right off the bat. I've had many jobs where we're supposed to view our coworkers like family. Our job, even if it's a big evil corporation, we're a family, right? But aren't most families pretty dysfunctional?
I mean, I think on some level, yes. I mean, if you're a family, and of course, you can define family however you like. I like the idea of defining family as people who love and support you. Family can be chosen. You can be related. You can be by blood or by marriage, what have you. It's up to you. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be some conflict eventually. There's going to be some fighting. That's natural. And yes, the dysfunctional family is definitely a common trope, I think. And yeah, it's funny to think of a workplace as a family, but I think that's very advantageous, as a perspective for a lot of employers, because the idea is like, it's your family. You're supposed to sacrifice for your family. You're supposed to invest in your family. You're supposed to care about your family. You're supposed to spend time with your family. There's all these, cultural notions around family that I think the workplace, could seemingly benefit from in terms of capitalizing on people's time and energy and resources. And I don't know, I don't think it's necessarily insidious per se. I would like to think that employers that talk about that might think it's mutually beneficial, because of course, if you enjoy your work more truly, if you do feel connected to your work, it's easier to do and it's not as draining. So there might be this idea that it's mutually beneficial, but I think it can bring more harm than you realize if not, and it can be very subtle. So I think there's a lot of caution. And I think the most concerning thing is that, and this is something people have trouble with their families and with work, is the idea of setting boundaries, right?
Yes.
Yes. And setting boundaries means saying no sometimes. It means removing yourself from the situation sometimes. It means, being very clear about what you're willing and not willing to do. And so I think it's important both, within your family and within your workplace to feel empowered to set boundaries and know that the world will not crash and burn if you do so. And, as someone who grew up in a very tenuous family dynamic, and I know, Amanda, you can definitely relate to that, and you've spoken about it openly in the pod, like when you are a young person stepping into the work world for the first time, and you're first offered this idea of like, oh, your work can be your family, it can be very attractive, because if you didn't have such a great family situation growing up, or or it wasn't what you hoped it would be, you're like, okay, maybe this is my opportunity. I'm spending time, I'm earning money. These people seem to value what I have to offer. They're giving me all this responsibility. They're interested in what I have to say and what I'm doing. They want more from me. It's the attention, it's the praise, and it can be very seductive and enticing. And then you get trapped so easily in this like work spiral. And I talk about my experience with that in the article, and I imagine you might have had similar experience yourself.
I, as a person who comes from a very abusive, traumatic family background, I have found that actually that whole like we're a family thing in a workplace actually makes me, I don't know, like more tolerant of abuse. Like I don't see it as abuse until later, and it's bad for me, like because when I hear family, my brain is like, oh, these are people who treat you like crap. But it's like, it's that's what it is. That's what it is to be a family, and I think it makes it impossible for me to draw boundaries. It also gives me really bad anxiety that I might not see in the moment. The job I had with a startup where my boss was the CEO, and she was a bully. Like she would bully people about their clothes, just in general bully them, like just look for something. And she was very volatile emotionally. And this was so similar to my mom. And the atmosphere just reminded me so much of my home life. And of course, we're all a family. We're all sacrificing for this mission, which is like to make money, I guess. And my anxiety, I was starting to realize, was exactly like the anxiety I'd feel as a kid when my mom was just, going off on something she was angry about. Like it was also unpredictable. And what was predictable is that at some point someone would be angry and yelling, and that made it really, it took a toll on me, and I think that can be one of the flaws of the work is family approach.
Absolutely. And that's the scary thing though, right? Is because if you come from these toxic family dynamics or these dysfunctional family dynamics, that feels normal. That is something you're used to coping with. You're used to maybe keeping the peace or like doing whatever it takes to satisfy people who are frustrated or angry so that they won't express that anymore. And you fall into that pattern at work because you're good at it. You've been doing it since you were, a child, and it feels normal. That's what you're used to. So it can be quite bad for your mental health and just really, dangerous.
Because you don't spot it as what it is, right? I'm sure there are other people who can come into those situations who haven't had that kind of experience with family and be like, what kind of family is this? Maybe not, actually. Maybe everybody is like, but we're family. But it takes me back to something you said when we started talking about this work is family concept. And you talked about how family is there to support you.
It should be.
It should be, right? Your job's not supporting you. I mean, yeah, they're giving you a paycheck, but they can cut that off at any moment.
Plus, you earned that. You worked for that. They're not giving it to you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's another great thing to point out is that, yes, I'm sure growing up in your home, I know I had chores and responsibilities, but like my membership in the family, if you will, was not contingent upon me doing work. I could be lazy and lay on the couch all day and I might get yelled at for it, but like I was still in the family. And also my family never said, we have been talking and we're just like not making the level of profit we've been wanting to make in this family. So we're going to cut you loose. Like, no,
absolutely. Yeah. They're not just going to give up on you because you're having a bad week, a bad month, a bad year. Family is meant to be there for you through good times and bad, but your job will lay you off. And when you retire, if you're fortunate enough to retire, your job will cease to exist as a connection for you. They're not going to visit you in your retirement and spend your golden years with you. It might be convenient for them to masquerade as family when things are good, but when the going gets tough, more often than not, your job is gonna, cut its losses. It's not gonna love you anymore, so to speak.
Right. Whereas your family, theoretically, would still love you.
If they're a good family, right? And, family dynamics are complex, right? I think part of the challenge of the situation is the nuance. Nothing is black and white. It's not a good job or a bad job per se. It's not a good family or a bad family. It's complicated, and that's where the confusion can arise. But yeah, if a family should be there for you.
And at its core, your family wants best for you. Your family wants you to take time off. Your family wants you to care for your health, go to the doctor, take the rest and rejuvenation that you need. Your job doesn't want that. Your job is going to be like, I've noticed you've been going to a lot of doctor's appointments lately, and I'm worried it's affecting your performance.
Yeah.
Your family would say, I've been noticed you've been going to a lot of doctor's appointments lately. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it?
Very true. Very true.
If it's a good family. Yeah. And I just think I hate this, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. All the different ways that your company gets you to so-called drink the Kool-Aid and get more work out of you, which leads to overwork and burnout.
Free labor.
Yeah, exactly. Can you think of other sort of manipulations that employers use on people?
I am always a little bit hesitant about team building exercises. Maybe it's just my suspicious nature. But I'm like, if you really are okay with me not actually doing any productive work for a couple hours to do these personality tests, so then we can talk about how we're all introverts.
Those are the worst.
Then can I just have that hour off instead? I might be, I would really much prefer it. But I wonder if the secret hope is that we all become best friends and all we want to do is spend time together at work, because I don't think that's going to happen, or at least not for me. And I'm just always why? I mean, you don't get to choose who you work with. I mean, granted, you don't necessarily always get to choose your family, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you have to be best friends with someone to work well with them. You can be professional adults and do your work and then clock off at some point. And I'm always suspicious of team building exercises. I think there are appropriate ways to do them. And then there are some ways that are just transparently, silly. And I don't know. I'm like, what's the real goal here? Because I'm not making money for you right now while I'm, doing this icebreaker. So what's the end game here? I'm always a little bit suspicious of team building.
Totally. Like mandatory fun.
I know. Oh, mandatory fun. Oh, hate it.
I've worked two separate places. One was when I was working retail, and another was a startup, the startup that gave me anxiety. And in both of those places, we were not allowed to hang out with one another outside of work at all. And it was very frowned upon. And we, at the retail store, which I know, the retail store had easily 50 employees, probably 75. We were all young people. We all worked together all the time. We worked so hard. We saw one another more than we saw anyone else. And if we were caught hanging out together, we could get written up. I had one store manager who was literally driving around trying to spot us hanging out at different locations. That's insane.
Sad.
That's so sad. It's we're your family and we want you to sacrifice everything for it, but don't hang out unless it's under our terms, right? And the startup was similar that way, in that we would be required to do this mandatory fun stuff where literally all of us in leadership would get a lecture about how we had to make it as fun as possible and all of this stuff. And then we would do it, and it would, of course, be forced fun, not fun. And if someone had too much fun at it, we would have to give them a talking to later about having too much fun. I mean, it's you just can't win with these team building nonsense. Either your team is going to be built by working side by side or it's not. I don't think having a kegger or a scavenger hunt or doing trust falls is going to change that. You know?
And I'm also always suspicious, back to this mandatory fun, that I feel like these are also, okay, yeah, indulge my conspiracy theories. I feel like these are also always like secret data collecting missions. Like, let's see what we can get people to volunteer about themselves so that we can use that as collateral later. You know?
I mean, that's interesting.
Like,
I like what you're saying here.
Like, heaven forbid that you want to ask for time off for something, or like you have a need or an interest that doesn't relate to work that would detract from your ability to be present for work. I mean, you've just handed your employer knowledge about you that they could use to manipulate you in a way that would, affect your job. I don't know. I'm always hesitant to like give out that kind of information because I've seen it used in ways that I think is a little bit unsavory or unscrupulous. So I really also think that there's ulterior motives to this like mandatory fun, and I'm always like a little bit sus, to be honest.
I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but I love it.
Oh gosh, that's just my level of paranoia for you. But seriously, like, I'm always cognizant of whatever I'm willing to share with my employer, because there's just something in the back of my head, like, can I trust them? Could they use this against me later? You never know. Your employer is not your family. They could turn on you. And in a state like Pennsylvania, where you're an at-will employee, that essentially means, you can be let go at any time for little to no reason. It's at your employer's discretion. So why give them any reason? I just feel like, there's this lack of trust, with certain employers, if they're not willing to be transparent, but they expect you to share all this information about yourself. And it can be very scary and frustrating.
Oh, yeah, totally. Totally. And having worked on the leadership end, I've been in the meetings where it's like, let's set people up for failure. Let's use things against them because we want to get rid of them, but we don't want to like fire them outright.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, okay, let's create cause.
Yeah. Let's create the cause by promoting them when we know they're not ready so that they will fail, and then we can let them go and they can't sue us. That's literally been conversations I've had to listen to. It's terrible.
Wow.
Yeah. Definitely just like, oh yeah, well, I heard this about blah, blah, blah. So I think that long-term we shouldn't have them around. Like that kind of like pre-planning for when they're going to end your employment based on something you said one time that they didn't like or didn't think was a cultural fit.
Right. Oh yeah. Let's bring back that favorite, evaluating cultural fit. Oof.
Don't get me started. It's gross. Well, okay, let's talk about overworking because like in most jobs, it's easy to overwork and burn yourself out. I mean, in fact, that's what your employer wants. They don't want you to get burned out, but they want you to be like running full throttle all the time, because if you can do the work of 2 people or 4 people or 6 people, you save the company a lot of money. One of the best bosses I've ever had was actually at ModCloth. Her name's Emily. Hi, Emily. She said to me my first week there, she said, if you're here late more than every once in a while, then I want us to talk, because either I'm giving you too much work or you don't have the right tools to get the work done. And for me, that was such a like, I don't know, a light bulb moment where I was like, this is the manager that I'm going to be. And I've been that manager at every one of my jobs where like, I don't want the people who work for me on my team there later than me. And I'll do anything to ensure that that is the case. So I've had conversely worked with people who are like, the lower you are on the totem pole, the more hours you should be working to pay your dues. And I don't believe that. I believe that we're a team. I don't believe that we're a family, right? But I believe that we're a team working for a common goal. And in that regard, you want to look out for everyone on the team.
Absolutely.
And that's just, team and family are 2 different sets of relationships.
Totally. And you want them to be cohesive, both of those sets of relationships, but they are different. And I love that. Yeah. That's like the way a manager should be, in my opinion, giving people the support they need. And that's how you reduce turnover. But I feel like a lot of employers are relying on this idea of high turnover. Like, okay, well, we let all those people go. If you're still here, that means you want to be here. So you'll pick up the slack, or you'll just quit. Like they'll outsource that burden to the worker again. And it's like, okay, I have to work insanely hard to either keep my job or I have to quit and not even get the opportunity at unemployment benefits. So you're like between a rock and a hard place there.
Oh, it's totally true. You feel trapped. I actually was talking to someone else recently about how some companies, and I will tell you specifically in the fashion industry for sure, want turnover. They want people to leave. They want people to leave because, maybe they think they are getting too old and aren't cool. They don't want to pay them as much money as they have been. It's cheaper to bring in someone else.
New.
Yeah, it's just all about like the least expensive, youngest person who's going to put in the most amount of time. And yeah, they technically can't let you go because you have been there for a while or because now you have a family and you have different priorities. They can't do that, but they'll push you out the door in other ways. And I've seen this consistently throughout my career. And I just feel like it's time for us to turn all this stuff upside down.
Absolutely.
Why do we continue to carry this on?
We shouldn't. And I don't understand why employers think this is the best model. I don't know if you saw in the news, Amanda, but there's this, and I apologize if I mispronounce it. There's this ice cream parlor in Pittsburgh, Clavon's, and they made national news recently because they were trying to hire new positions for the ice cream parlor, and they weren't getting a lot of response for the positions that they put out there. So they raised the hourly wage to starting at $15 an hour for these positions, and they got 1,000 applications. And they hired people.
Wow.
They haven't seen a difference in their bottom line, and business is going incredibly well for them, and that's amazing. They put an upfront investment, like, hey, we want to offer you this amount of money to work at our ice cream parlor, a locally owned small business, and people responded to that. And you get a lot of good applicants when you are able to offer those kinds of resources, to offer something that's actually desirable and shows investment in the employee or the potential employee, and just like, it could be a win-win for everyone potentially. And I wish more employers saw it that way.
Agreed. I think that we forget because we've been, working in this system our entire adult lives. We just assume that this is just how it has to be and we're powerless to change it. But actually, they need us to do the work. Like we actually have so much power. And I feel like if we band together as a society, as a generation of people and say, no, we're done. We're done with this. Like, we're going to work this schedule. We're not going to answer Slacks on the weekend. We're not going to read our email on the weekend. When we're homesick, we don't want to hear from any of you, if we find out that you're laying off people, even though you can afford to pay them just to like boost your profitability, we're going to boycott you. We need to change the system because there's no reason. It's like, listen, people used to use leeches and bloodletting to treat ailments, right? Like that was what doctors would come and do. We didn't keep doing that just because it had been happening for a long time. No, at some point someone said, oh, it seems like these are not really helping. Let's find something better. That's how we have to be about our relationships with our employers because there are way more of us than them. And we have a lot of power there, even if it doesn't feel like it. I can tell you at all my jobs, I was like, I am so desperate for this job. I am so powerless. I must do whatever they say, no matter how miserable it makes me. And I can never set up boundaries because I am desperate for this job.
Right. And believing that submission is easier than the alternative.
Yeah. We got to stop that. This is how we perpetuate this. Do we want the next generation of people to have to work with all this stupid stuff? I feel like work has actually gotten worse in this century than better.
I agree in a lot of ways. And I think, something that it's taken me a while to figure out, and I hope other people have figured this out too, is like you can actually say no a lot more than you realize.
Yes.
And you have power and you have rights, and we need to make sure that we're educated about our rights as laborers, and we need to challenge our employers on that front and not just, kowtow to every single demand.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about is how hustle culture kind of fetishizes burnout. Like, you're not working if you're not burned out, right?
Oh my gosh, so true, right?
Is that a mug? Did someone make that into a mug yet?
I'm sure they have. I'm sure it's for sale on Etsy right now. I even feel like it pairs well, unfortunately, with this idea that, there's unskilled labor out there. It's like, okay, well, if you're not burnt out, that means you're not in demand. You're not working hard. You don't have the skills to pay the bills. You're not trying. Like, being overworked is such a luxury because you have that opportunity. Forget that. I would much rather be able to achieve some sort of work-life balance. That seems like the true luxury, the true gem to me.
There's so much wrapped up in this idea of like dream jobs, and everyone should be chasing their dream. And so you're supposed to like pursue that dream at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, like, something I would think about a lot working as a buyer is that I know that buyer is for so many people a dream job. They think working in fashion is like the ultimate, most glamorous, exciting thing you could ever do.
Mm-hmm.
And there would be times where I would be just so exhausted, so frustrated, so burned out. And I would be like, well, you have someone's dream job, so I guess you need to keep at it. And I feel like that's, I don't know, it's sort of like self-poisoning to look at it that way.
Right.
That it first off, if it's not your dream, maybe consider doing something else. But also, like, this idea that a job is supposed to be the dream is ridiculous too.
Absolutely. And you should never define your dreams by someone else's, There's that too. Yeah. And sometimes you achieve that dream, that proverbial dream, and maybe you realize it's not for you. And that's okay. You try something else then. You don't have to stick with it because it's, glamorous or desirable, for all the other reasons that people will project onto you. Like, it's not worth it.
A job is a job, and your life is your life. And your life is more important than your job.
Right. And let's remember who we're working so hard at these jobs for, not just for ourselves, but for the people we want to spend our lives with, or, the living creatures, whether it's, your family, your spouse, your partner, your friends, your dog, your cat, your turtle, your pet, who, like, whatever, think about, who you're coming home to after work, so to speak, even if it's just yourself, show up for yourself. After you clock out, you deserve, the best of you, and you don't have to just give it all away at work and then become a shell, after hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like, who are you working for? I think that's what we should be asking.
That's a good question everybody should ask themselves right now.
Yeah.
Because I think that gets you to the crux of the issue for so many people.
Absolutely. And thinking about your goals and separating them from your employer's goals. Like, okay, you're slaving away at this job, why? For how long? And what are you trying to achieve? Like, we need to start asking ourselves these important questions so we can confidently set boundaries and save some of ourselves for, the 5 to 9.
Absolutely. I have been thinking a lot, and I've talked about on the podcast, this idea of like missions and like how companies will be like, we're doing it for this. This is what all the work is for. And I have fallen for that multiple times.
Oh, me too. So hard. Well, it's so sexy.
You work in like the nonprofit sector, so you're especially on a mission. But even
they'll get you with that. And then, we're not going to pay you well, and you're going to work overtime, but it's for the good of humanity, for the planet. You basically turn yourself into a martyr, and I hate that.
Me too.
And, it's so not worth it. Just because your company might have an excellent, worthwhile mission doesn't mean you deserve, poverty level wages or despicable, like pathetic benefits. Like, you deserve a good quality of life, regardless of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think it is often used as a way to pay people less and give them less benefits.
Oh, yeah.
And I also think it is used as a way to get people to prioritize their work over themselves. Because you're on this mission. Hey, you don't want to let the whole world down just because you wanted to go to the beach this weekend, do you, Meg? I want you to think about it. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Sacrifice is the name of the game.
Yeah. I hate
like
that.
You have to earn leisure time. Forget that.
I mean, some jobs I've worked, it's like they haven't tried to make some like we're changing the world mission, but they definitely try to suck you into this idea of like, don't you want to help us make the most money ever? And then you're like, yes, I do, which is even darker to think about. But like you're like,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I guess I won't celebrate my husband's birthday because like if we don't meet our quarterly sales, like what's going to happen? Nothing. An asteroid isn't going to hit the planet, like,
oh my God, so true.
A million birds aren't going to die or something. Like it is just what it is. And I think that companies sort of loop us into these like scams. I think that strip us of our lives, like our individual identities and our individual relationships. And that's why you get burned out, like, and once you're there, I just feel like you can't get out of it.
It's so hard. And speaking of fashion, given your experience, Amanda, I always think back to that scene in The Devil Wears Prada, to bring it up, when, Miranda, she's talking to, I forget the character's name, whoever Anne Hathaway played. She's like, everyone wants to be us. What we do is so important. And I think they suck you in that way, given the idea, like what we're doing is so important and so demand, like you have to be giving it your all. Like people are expecting the most from us. Like, are you really going to let them down? Like there are all these like grand expectations, and what you're doing is more important than what other people are doing, in the industry. And it's an easy way to get people to buy in and, to feel that, their time is being spent in a worthwhile way because it's, fulfilling this greater, something that's greater than them.
I know. That whole idea of self-importance in fashion, I personally would like us to destroy all copies of Devil Wears Prada and do a surgical procedure on anyone who's ever seen that movie so they forget it, because I think it reinforced all that nonsense. And so, like, if you work in the fashion industry, no one even needs to give you a fake mission that you're sacrificing yourself for. It's just fashion. Well, it was so nice to talk to you, Meg. This was so fun.
Yeah, this was great as per usual.
I just want to say officially that I cannot wait until I get to hang out with Meg IRL so we can talk about 90 Day Fiancé. I need to talk about it with someone other than Dustin, although he is a delightful partner for 90 Day Fiancé viewing. And so, Meg, we're going to talk about it. On a more serious note, I want to talk about at-will employment. That may not be a term you've heard before, but we mentioned it in our conversation. If you have a job, or you have ever had a job, chances are very, very, very high that the terms of your employment were, quote, at will, unless you had a very clear contract with your employer that stated otherwise. And also, at-will employment can apply to just about any kind of job, no matter the level in one's career, the salary, the title, or even the industry. And you're like, okay, Amanda, you're building up the hype here. What is at-will employment? Well, in every state except for Montana, at-will employment means that employers can fire their workers freely without a justifiable reason, as long as they can prove in court that the firing didn't violate anti-discrimination laws. This is a very scary position for workers who rely on their jobs not only to, live, but also on the health insurance that comes with that job. Can we just, this is a different podcast episode clearly, but I want to talk about this at some point. Can we just get Medicare for All happening now so we never have to worry about losing our access to healthcare just because of our job? But let's get back to something I said a moment ago. As long as they can prove in court that the firing didn't violate anti-discrimination laws. That is really the sticky point here for employers that you probably don't know exists. I know I didn't. Those laws, which were created to protect workers, yet few of us know about, and trust me, our employers definitely don't want us to know about, include discrimination based on race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, religion, age, disability, genetic information. It also includes retaliation for protected activity related to the anti-discrimination laws, like as in if you filed a complaint with your state or federal government about discrimination you were experiencing on this job, you can't be then fired as retaliation for that. You can't be fired for your use of the Family and Medical Leave Act. You can't be fired for reporting unsafe working conditions to OSHA. I mean, on and on and on. You are so much more protected than you know, but most of us don't even know our rights as workers. It's not like we really talk about that in like the onboarding process, right? So your employer could lose in court if you felt that you were fired for discrimination, and in fact, that was true, right? Or more accurately, the employer couldn't prove with beyond a reasonable doubt that it wasn't true because probably you were fired for discrimination or retaliation. Real talk. If you really got down to brass tacks, if you really boiled the story down to its essence, discrimination was happening there. This is why your employer utilizes write-ups and disciplinary plans to make losing your job seem, what's the term I'm looking for here? I guess more neutral, thanks to all that bureaucracy. It takes the personal element out of you losing your job, right? Like, well, sorry, we moved through these steps. You went through the write-ups. Now you're gone, right? It's nothing personal. I read a great column from the New Republic called "At Will Employment is the Real Cancel Culture." I'll share it in the show notes. I loved it. That's why I'm talking about it. And this column argues that at-will employment keeps workers living in a culture of fear of losing their jobs. I know I have worked in that culture, specifically Black and non-Black workers of color, women, and LGBTQIA people. They are so afraid of losing their jobs and their health insurance due to retaliation for calling out illegal things that they see happening around them or to them. And let's be real here, plenty of people are being discriminated against in their workplaces. At-will employment ensures that workers are too frightened to speak out about what they're experiencing. There has been a small movement to shift laws toward just cause employment, which is basically not exactly the opposite of at-will, but means that there has to be a much more concrete and demonstrable reason for your termination. It was even part of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. I mean, many people, at least those that are aware of at-will employment, because a lot of us aren't, want it to end. When you actually ask people, if you explain to them what at-will employment is and ask them how they feel about it, they don't like it. A recent Data for Progress polling showed that 68% of respondents do not think that bosses should be able to fire workers for any reason. So the sentiment is there that things must change. Just cause provisions are also a major element of union negotiations, which is another reason why so many employers are fighting unionization, including Amazon, Target, and tons of other smaller businesses and big retail chains. When someone asks me why someone would want to join an Amazon union when the warehouse already pays more than minimum wage and offers benefits, this is one thing I throw back at them, that Amazon can just technically up and fire someone at any time. And that's not a culture that encourages fairness. That's a culture in which your need to use the bathroom more often than someone else could get you fired. Okay? How fair is that? Yesterday, I was talking to Susan Massey, you all know her around here, about all the times we should have consulted a labor lawyer, reported our employer to OSHA or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Well, to be fair, Susan did report her employer to OSHA for some gross working conditions. And if you haven't read her blog post about that yet, I'll link it in the show notes. But what we did talk about is like there are so many other times that we have experienced illegal things on the job. Do you remember? This was a lot of episodes ago when I talked about how I had written on my Facebook that at some point I would like to move to LA. And the next thing I know, I was being dragged into the manager's office and forced to write out a resignation letter. I mean, come on. That is not legal. And I think it was actually retaliation for a sexual harassment claim that I had filed earlier that year. That's my real feeling there. Anyway, there were so many times that we should have taken bigger action, but didn't because we were just tired, busy, overworked, or most importantly, frightened. I am not ashamed to say my name is Amanda McCarty, and I have been so desperate for every job I've had that I would do nothing to jeopardize it. Even if I knew it was wrong, even if it was making me miserable, I had to have that job. You know, it was what stood between me and homelessness. Susan said in our conversation, quote, "I believe that that's by design. They keep you broke and exhausted so you can't fight back." I can't help but agree. I have always been desperate for my job, and there was no room to take the risk of losing it, even though I saw something wrong was happening around me. And I certainly didn't have the time or energy to figure out who I was supposed to talk to about the issues I was observing. The company that employed me for the longest, actually, is infamous for not having an HR department. This is the same company where I was forced to write that resignation letter. Despite that company having thousands of employees all around the world. Yep. There was no one safely to talk to about what I was experiencing and other things I'd observed around me. And I didn't really know exactly what an employer could or could not do to me. I just felt so powerless. There was no way I could change anything that I had experienced or that I saw happening around me. It's just what it is. That's how I saw it. Work is just fundamentally unfair and abusive, and we have to take it so we can keep having a home to live in, right? Well, guess what? We do have the power, and there are resources out there for us. I'm going to share some different places you can report issues with your employer that don't involve getting in touch with your HR department if your job even has one. Technically, we are all protected from a lot of things, and most of us don't know that. And our employers are so glad that we don't know our rights. I'm going to share a list of resources at clothehorsepodcast.com, and I'll also include that link in the show notes. But also, we have to support and empower those around us to take action when their employers are engaging in illegal and unethical behavior. We have to be the conduit of information and resources for them. You, yes, you, can also be a list of links and resources just like me. Because for every person in our community who is learning all of the things we are discussing, there are infinitely more people who don't have access to that information. And knowledge is power, especially when we talk about our rights as workers. We must share our power. When you combine that with the power we have as workers and consumers, well, that's some major megatons of power. So let's not forget that. We know what is right, and we want a better, more equitable world. We will not stop that fight, and we will not be defeated. We will not give up, even when we're tired. I know a lot of us are tired. We shall persist. And when we do feel defeated, exhausted, other members of our community will be there to prop us up, to lend us their strength, and keep the fight going. I know that I will be there for you. I'll be there for you when you're exhausted.
Hello, Haley here from the Clotheshorse.world blog team, giving you a sneak peek of what is coming up on the blog this week. Free shipping is always a hot topic here at Clotheshorse. On Monday, we have an article about the true cost of free shipping by Bethany May. She takes on free shipping from a trucker's perspective. This essay is a fun read where I learned so much from a new perspective about how free shipping is never free. On Tuesday, we kick off Personal Style Month with a DIY post by Clotheshorse blog regular Hannah that teaches you how to upcycle your old clothing into a yoga bolster via knitting. This is such a cool idea, especially since workout equipment can be so expensive. Be sure to check out that, as well as her past DIY posts. Wednesday, we have an article by Maggie about her style evolution as a fashion blogger. She will detail how she transformed her style blog from trying to sell you things and mimic other influencers to being a place where she can express herself and stay true to what she believes in. On Thursday, we have an exciting post by Rabbit Person titled Faking Vintage, but this post is about much more than that. She discusses her relationship with beauty, secondhand clothing, and how it shouldn't be all about wearing true vintage and gatekeeping, but instead be a way for all people to access quality clothing and learn how to make clothing last as long as possible to stay out of the landfill. We are all set on posts for Personal Style Month and are now looking for contributors for Body and Beauty Month. The deadline for submissions is coming up in a couple of weeks on Saturday, June 19th, so be sure to send it over to submissions at Clotheshorse.world.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Clotheshorse. If you like what you're hearing, as always, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. This is how we get more people to listen. This is how we get more people to learn about what we're working on and to learn the power that they have. So tell everyone. If you'd like to support my work, please consider becoming a patron. You can find more information at patreon.com/clothehorsepodcast, or you can send a direct donation via Venmo to @crystal_visions. And don't forget that you can find us on Instagram at Clotheshorse If you want to meet other Clotheshorse listeners, join the Clothehorsing Around Facebook group. A listener recently reached out to me asking if we could move the group elsewhere to Slack or Discord for those who don't have a Facebook account or just don't want to engage with Facebook, which I definitely get. I'll be doing a poll on Instagram later this week to see how all of you are feeling about that. So keep an eye out. And don't forget to check out my other podcast, The Department. Thanks, as always, to Dustin Travis White for our music and audio support. Bye.